Candilejas, teatro y espectáculo con César Vidal.
We're back for a very special moment of this program during the week. Of course, you know that we have very, very good persons during the programs, in the end of the programs from Monday to Thursday. We have people speaking about psychology, speaking about economics, speaking about literature, but we have always a very special person in the Friday night. It's a very special person that sometimes is well known over the whole world because maybe he was a director that won an Oscar, maybe she's a ballerina, maybe she's a tenor, and they are well known over all the world. Sometimes the person is well known, but only in her or his country. Sometimes it's only known in some regions of this country, of this continent. But you know that always this person is a very special person. Of course, this is the case tonight. Tonight I have the pleasure, the privilege, the honor of introducing to you a very special woman. I must tell you that is a well-learned woman. She's an academic. I could say she's even a scholar, but overall is a brave woman and is an example of integrity and an example of a valiant behavior. I think that also she's a very brave woman dealing with very delicate, difficult, special situations. These kind of situations that a lot of people don't want to know, that they turn the eyes to another direction to see not. But thanks God we have persons as our interview of tonight to talk about this, to fight these conducts, to be a brave person. Well, I'm talking about Amy Neustein. And I must tell you that only several years ago, in 2011, this woman was talking about artificial intelligence in the first university that was founded in Europe, in the old Europe. This was in the University of Salamanca. So that it's possible that maybe some of the persons that are listening this program from Spain met her and I'm sure never thought they were going to listen what they're going to listen tonight. Well, Amy, welcome. Thank you very much for coming with us tonight.
Thank you. It's my pleasure. It's my pleasure to be here.
First question, and I think this could be a good introduction to make acquaintance with you. This is only curiosity, but what were you doing at the University of Salamanca in 2011?
I was a keynote speaker, their first keynote, in fact, at the Soft Computing Conference. It was an AI conference that examined alternative methodology to be able to circumvent and obviate some difficult and complex problems in computer programming, particularly how computers would understand the nuances of human language and emotions and sentiment, issues that computers have a difficult time grappling with and understanding. So soft computing is a field, it's a subfield of artificial intelligence. And what it does, it advances methodologies that can compensate for the difficulty in rigorous what they call hard computer programming rules or hard computer algorithms, where something is not black on white, but it's gray, it's fuzzy logic is one of the examples that will come to mind. So I advanced a method that I had been developing over the years that has been cited quite a bit in the professional literature, called sequence package analysis, and it was a way of programming a computer to understand the vagaries and circumlocutions and unpredictabilities of in human language, because human language is not black on white where you choose one word versus another word, and it's very difficult. Everyone speaks in their own unique, particular way, and when you speak to an interactive voice response system and they just tell you to speak freely and they don't tell you what words to choose, it's very hard for the system to understand free text, natural language, human language, because of the vagaries and ambiguities and specific ways that we speak. Nothing can be really patterned or routinized to the point where computers can sufficiently understand human language. So I designed a method that would compensate for that tremendous lacuna, that tremendous gap in the ability of computers to understand human language. And I advanced that methodology. I described it. I gave examples. I had a lengthy slide presentation, and I was the keynote speaker. And I was treated like royalty. In fact, the conference chair surprised me with a beautiful gift at the end. It was a piece of sculpture that was a model of the University of Salamanca, built in the 8th century by the Moors. And it was a sculpture that was a model. It was a rendition of what the university looked like originally when it was built. And of course, most of that architecture, thank God, has been preserved. It's an exquisite university. So it was it was gratifying. It was thrilling and rewarding to take this trip. And of course, I was treated very well as a keynote speaker. And that was April of 2011. But when I came back to New Jersey, where I live in Fort Lee, New Jersey, I was met with a whole different reaction from the unfortunate world in which I was forced to live for almost 40 years, my world of captivity.
Amy, I guess we're going not to talk very much about computer tonight, but anyway, we're going to touch very delicate questions. But we're going to follow this story you have begun about your back to US and what did you find in US. But what is your academic background?
Okay, I have a Ph.D. in sociology from Boston University. I earned that degree at the age of 23. It was in May of 1981. My specialty area was sociolinguistics and sociology of knowledge. Those were the two tracks that I had specialized in at Boston University. And as a result of the sociolinguistic training, I then transitioned over to the area of speech technology, wherein I edit the International Journal of Speech Technology since 2008. I'm their editor-in-chief. I also edit 3 book series, 2 for Springer and 1 for De Gruyter. And I was profiled in the 2018 United Nations campaign with publishers such as Springer Verlag in what was called Outstanding Women in STEM. And I was one of the women who was chosen because of my editing the International Journal of Speech Technology. And I edit for De Gruyter a series in text mining and medicine and healthcare. And I edit for Springer 2 series. One is in Springer Briefs and Speech Technology, and the other one is in Signals and Communication. And I can't tell you how much I enjoy this work. It's so deeply, deeply gratifying to work with researchers from all over the world and to help them, to nurture them and help them bring their work to fruition. They have articles published in my journal. I turn out between 80 and 85 articles per year, and I turn out several books a year with my series. And in addition to that, I have edited, 16 academic books. 15 and 16 are in process. I'm under contract with Oxford University Press to write 2 books. One is an update. It's a second edition of From Madness to Mutiny, Why Mothers Are Running from the Family Courts and What Can Be Done About It, which was a book that I wrote initially in 2005. It was the lead title for the University Press of New England, which is an Ivy League house. It's a consortium of Dartmouth College Press and Brandeis University Press and 6 houses. They then disbanded a few years ago, and Oxford University Press contracted with me to write a second edition of From Madness to Mutiny. But I'm also writing for Oxford University Press another book titled Moral Schisms, When Institutions Defy Jewish Law. And why do I call it a moral schism? Because it's not hypocrisy. Hypocrisy is when on the surface you feel one way and you do something else to get along. So you're a hypocrite. There's dissonance and inconsistency. But this is much worse and much more serious. Very good people who are kind-hearted and they follow the Jewish law and they believe in God and they go to prayer service have a schism, a break that goes from the surface all the way to the very bottom. It's like a crater, an earth that splits open, a schism in their morality, and that schism enables them to sex traffic children. It enables them to physically assault those whistleblowers who try to protect children. It enables them to kill children to see the children starve themselves to death because they don't want their bodies violated, and the children are denied medical care willfully and deliberately and intentionally. They're able to do that. They're able to throw bleach in the face, in the eyes of a Rabbi Nuchem Rosenberg, who was profiled in Vice magazine by Chris Ketchum in 2013. Bleach was thrown in his eye because he was a rabbi from Brooklyn, and he was the champion of abuse victims and encouraging them not only to speak out, but not to allow themselves to be constantly sexually violated, sodomized, and raped. And in retaliation, those who wanted this mechanism to perpetuate, they threw bleach in his face. In England, in Stamford Hill, England, several years back, there was a family whose child was abused by the school associate director, and the parents went to the police. A criminal case ensued. There was sufficient evidence to prosecute the offender successfully. He was convicted, and as a result, a mob assembled in front of the house of the victim's parents, and the victim, with the child who was abused, was living with his parents. And they threw rockets into the house and broke the windows, and parents were afraid they were going to be killed, obviously, from this type of violence. So they ran away in the middle of the night and never came back. This is not an anomaly. In New York, in Brooklyn, New York, there was a family that was run out of town. The name is and the child was abused. The case was exposed on NBC News. I wrote about it extensively in Tempest in the Temple. New York Magazine had mentioned the case. It was a very prominent case. And when the father, the parents of the child went to the district attorney at the urging of social workers that worked for an agency in Brooklyn. And the pediatrician who was taking care of the child from Mount Sinai Hospital was also a witness for the DA's case. The DA charged the offender with 96 counts of child sexual abuse, which means 96 times the father abused the child. And when the case was being heard before the grand jury, a rabbinic court assembled, and they put pressure on the DA. The case was disbanded. It never went to a finding because it was just they interrupted the grand jury, and the family of the abuse victim was run out of town. They were pilloried. They were mocked by the community. They were chastised. They were excoriated, and they were afraid for their physical safety. So they ran out of town. And I received a death threat last year from the victim's brother. The name is Hafner, Rabbi Solomon Hafner. His brother sent me an email saying to me, "You better do penitence, and I'm giving you a choice. Either you do it now or you do it on your deathbed." So in essence, he was telling me that something was going to happen to me because I'm not old enough to die, thank God. God doesn't want me yet for certain reasons. So I'm down here on earth, and I'm being told by the victim's brother, by the perpetrator's brother, that I could either do penitence right now, or I could do it on my deathbed, which won't be that much longer from now. Basically, that was the insinuation, and I don't take that easily. I'm not afraid because I'm afraid of one being. I'm afraid of God, that I'm accountable to God, and I'm afraid of God. I am not afraid of man, because if I were to be afraid of man, then I'd be making man God, and that would be idolatry. And those were the words of a very kind rabbi in Chicago by the name of Rabbi Salivic. And he mentioned that if you are afraid, he got up publicly and he stated, if a person is afraid of the community and because of that fear they don't protect abuse victims, then they are venerating a community member and they are apotheosizing the community member and putting them on a level where they are a deity, where they are God. So they are committing idolatry, because you're supposed to worship God, not worship man. So he is a very good example, a wonderful, kind rabbi. And what bothers me is that there are some very good voices in the Jewish community that are so upset about what's happening, and they want to protect victims, but unfortunately, they don't have the money, they don't have the clout, and they're so few in number that they have been overcome and by the citadels of power in the Orthodox Jewish community that possess the money and the power and the clout, and they have used such menacing tactics on victims and those who are advocates for victims that it is a disgrace. It's a disgrace, and there's a lot of hatred that for victims, because the victims really point to the deficiencies and weaknesses of the perpetrators and those who are protecting them. But it's more than that. The community needs victims because it's money making. Sex trafficking is a very big industry, and the community needs money very badly. They need money for their existence, for their survival. They need money. And you're going to probably, we'll get to that, but you're probably thinking to yourself, Jews have plenty of money. Why do they need more money? Well, they do need more money. They need a lot of money because we see what's going on now with Gaza. And they need money to build up the West Bank settlements. They need money to arm the West Bank settlements. They need a lot of money for public relations. They need money to give to politicians in order to have the Jewish cause and the Jewish voice cherished and protected and rightfully protected. They have to give a lot of money to political coffers. So there's a constant need for money to flow into community. Child sex trafficking is a tremendous way. It's a fantastic way of bringing in money very quickly. And that is what is going on. And I'm talking about that openly, that the sex trafficking of children and anyone who tries to upset the apple cart and expose the sex trafficking is either murdered or they're shunned, they're made into social pariahs, and psychological warfare is used against them, because the sex trafficking equals Jewish survival. Because without the money,
Amy,
yes.
I think you have touched several issues. I should like to see them one by one. First, for most people, the sexual abuse of children appears more linked to priests and bishops and cardinals in the Roman Catholic Church. To what extent is this problem similar among Orthodox Jews in the Orthodox Jewish communities?
It's worse in the Jewish community for this reason. When there is abuse, there is in the Orthodox community, you cannot get remedy the way you would in a non-Jewish community. In a non-Jewish community, if there's abuse, the victim can go to law enforcement, and the victim can get a prosecution of the priest that is abusing the children. But in the Jewish community, where you have voting blocks, where the Orthodox Jews vote as a block, the DA, who is a politician because he runs for office, he's an elected official.
Yeah.
He's afraid. He's afraid of losing the Orthodox electorate. So he is not going to prosecute a case of child abuse because the Jews vote as a bloc. You don't have that in the non-Jewish population. That's number one. Number two, in the Jewish world, you have rabbinic courts that use tactics to threaten, intimidate, and harass the witnesses that want to testify before the grand jury. So these are therapists that are treating the abuse victims, school teachers, doctors within the community, etc. They are not allowed to cooperate with the district attorneys because the rabbinic court hijacks the process by holding their own proceeding. The rabbinic court holds a simultaneous legal proceeding to the district attorney's investigation of the case. So all the forensic evidence, for example, that's going to go before the grand jury, it's seized by the rabbinic court, which intimidates the Orthodox witnesses into not cooperating with the district attorney. So there's witness tampering, basically, and there's the pollution of evidence, and the obstruction of justice, and the interference with the criminal process of prosecuting offenders. So if you interfere with the process of prosecuting offenders, what happens? The offender is not arrested or stopped in his actions. He continues to abuse and abuse and abuse because there's no law enforcement mechanism to stop him. So that's why it's more severe in the Orthodox community, because you have these stratagems and mechanisms to intercept the normal process of curtailing the abuser by virtue of a criminal prosecution of the perpetrator of abuse. That's prevented in Orthodoxy by virtue of the obstruction of justice committed by rabbinic courts day after day after day. It is a very common practice.
Amy, I have read an interview with a rabbi in New York telling that up to 50% of Jewish children may be abused in this community. Do you think that this is a true statement or an exaggeration?
Well, it's very hard to tell because you have to examine which community. There are different Hasidic sects. There are different levels of orthodoxy. And what I look at it this way, if let's just say you start from the point that pathology, it does not know any kind of racial or ethnic divide. Pathology is pathology. So within a population, you have X amount of pathological individuals, whether they're Christian, whether they're Catholic, Islamic, Jewish, whatever it is, there's pathology. But if you have in the Jewish religion, when there is pathology, if you have mechanisms that prevent the prosecution of the perpetrator, then you're allowing that pathology to continue and continue without any surcease. You're not allowing it to stop. That's number one. Number two, if you have mechanisms in the Jewish community where you pillory and shame and bootstrap the victim from not going forward and exposing the perpetrator, then you're allowing the perpetrator to continue. And the shame and guilt that the victim feels, and the cowardice and fear of exposing the rabbi or whatever religious leader is abusing them, if that fear exists, then the victim is going to allow himself or herself to be victimized over and over again. So all the natural mechanisms that you would have outside the Jewish community where there is abuse perpetrated are not functioning in the Orthodox Jewish world. They're obviously not functioning. So that would lead to a higher number of abuse incidents. again, I don't think there's any greater pathology ab initio to start with. There's no greater pathology in the Jewish community as opposed to the non-Jewish community, because there's no evidence the pathology would be greater. And as a sociologist, I really wouldn't see any greater pathology in one community than the other. But I do see that when there is pathology in the Jewish community, there is an interception and a disabling of the mechanisms that are in play in other communities outside of the Jewish world. Those mechanisms that are used to stop the abuse they are no longer in the Jewish community. So, for example, in a Catholic school, someone is abused, and the abuse victim tells the parent, and the parent reports it to the principal. That parent is not threatened by the Catholics that because they're reporting it, that their children will never marry and that they'll become social pariahs and no one will do business with them. There's no such equivalent in terms of alienating and marginalizing the abuse victim's parents. There's no equivalent. But in Judaism, if you do complain to the director of the school, the principal, what have you, the pressure comes down on the family members of the abuse victim into ceasing and desisting in making a complaint, because they're threatened that they'll be given such a terrible name in the community that their children will never be able to marry other Jews, and they'll never be able to survive financially because everyone will boycott them. So they go through sort of like a BDS type movement, boycott, divestiture and sanctions. They go through their own type of BDS in the community where they are boycotted because they are reporting abuse. So because you have this type of interference with the ability to protect one's child from abuse, including this rabbi mentioned a few moments ago, this good Rabbi Nuchem Rosenberg, who had bleach thrown in his eyes and he suffered blindness as a result. I don't know whether it was temporary or permanent, whatever, but he had terrible eye injury, which is understandable. You wouldn't see this. You wouldn't open up the newspaper and read stories about a Catholic, a good priest, let's say, who wanted to expose what a bad priest was doing. You wouldn't hear incidents where the whole community ganged up on the priest and threw bleach in his eye. You'd never hear of anything as outlandish and as extreme as that. But yet, this is what happens in Orthodoxy. There is a menacing of the abuse victim. The abuse victim and the advocates are menaced, they're traumatized, and they're pressured and threatened into ceasing and desisting. So because of that, the incidence of abuse may indeed be higher, because anything that could protect that victim is destroyed. It's decimated because of the extraordinary power of the community and how everyone has a tendency to act in unison and make pariah out of the abuse victim and his or her advocates.
A few days ago, I watched Alan Dershowitz's interview on TV, and when the reporter asked him about his visits to the Epstein Island, everybody knows about the Epstein Island, Dershowitz got very angry and accused him of being an anti-Semite. Have you been accused of being an anti-Semite for revealing these uncomfortable realities?
Alan Dershowitz himself called me something even worse on the Charlie Rose Show in 1991. He called me a woman who is the worst kind of Jew that there is. And I didn't have a chance to respond. He said, I'm a woman who hates my Jewishness. And nothing could be further from the truth. I'm very proud to be a Jew. That's why I'm speaking out, because I want to save my people from this horrid fate. I want to clean out the evil ones so that the victims can be free to live and free to heal, and this shall never happen again. It's not anti-Semitism at all to talk openly about weaknesses and problems. If we keep sweeping it under the rug, it's going to get worse and worse and worse, and the problem will intensify. And that is what is happening. Alan Dershowitz happens to be a very tough litigator, and he's always he always has the gloves on, and he's always thinks he's in a boxing ring. And it's so easy to discredit another person by calling them an anti-Semite. And the Jews have a lot of control in the media. You have no idea. I have an idea how much control they have. I have tried so hard for so many decades to expose the cruelty of the community toward abuse victims. And every time I tried to get something on the air or I tried to get something into print, I was told the directors of the press, of let's say the magazine, of the newspapers, they had a meeting and we can't publish this because it's anti-Semitic. I said, how is it anti-Semitic if you're telling the truth? It's blood libel. I said, what is blood libel? Libel means false. This is blood truth. It's not blood libel. You take a Jewish child and you violate the child, and the child kills himself because he hangs himself in a closet with the tie, which happens in a specific case, and it's happened not once and not twice, but many times. Children killing themselves, and you say that it's a blood libel to say that this is happening. Where's the libel? It's blood truth. There's nothing libelous. There's nothing false. But the Jewish community for too long has been hiding behind the shield of anti-Semitism, and that's against God. Because it's interesting, God didn't tell the prophets, you can't chastise the people and bring them back to a moral course and expose them and verbally give them a tongue lashing for what they are doing. You can't. God didn't say you can't do this because it's anti-Semitic to do that. On the contrary, what God finds offensive is when a prophet says to God, oh, it'll do no good. I'm cynical. I don't think that if I call out the community for these transgressions, I don't think it'll change. That's what's against God. To give up hope and to be so cynical about mankind and womankind, to think that they can't change. That is against God. But it's not the prophets were not told, oh, you can't say this, you can't say that because it's anti-Semitic. This is a modern invention to allow voting blocks to have extraordinary power to do wrong. And the New York Times had many stories exposing the education fraud in the school system, where children were denied a secular education by very powerful voting blocks that made sure to put a lot of pressure on the Department of Education, while at the same time filling their pockets and the pockets in the community with a lot of largesse, with a lot of money from taxpayer revenue for all different types of special ed programs that were never delivered. This was fraud on top of fraud on top of fraud, and the New York Times was accused by the Orthodox community of doing, quote, a hit job, close quote, which is mafioso term. It's a very vulgar way of speaking. It's not a bad language, but it's low class. Hit job is what you see in the mafia terminology, and that was the first word that rabbis use to describe the New York Times' laborious and honest and in-depth coverage of the children in the system that were being denied an education. And I spoke to the reporters, most of whom were Jewish, and they told me the pain in their heart in doing that story, to see that their fellow Jews were being denied an education because of the corruption in the community, because of the corrupt way of manipulating the school system and lying about the secular studies and not teaching English. And as a result, people graduating, Orthodox Jews graduating from these substandard schools, if it's a woman, for example, and she marries and she has children and the child gets sick and she takes the child to the pediatrician, she doesn't know how to read the information sheet that's given to her to treat a wound, to know when to bring the child in for vaccinations, to be able to understand the signs and symptoms of serious illnesses in children that warrant going into the healthcare system. She cannot follow doctor's orders because she cannot read English. She cannot write English because she wasn't taught that. All she knows is Yiddish. So what kind of a mitzvah, meaning a good deed, is the corrupt citadel of power doing by preventing an English education and leaving women in a situation where they cannot go into the healthcare system to obtain the best healthcare possible for their children? They're paralyzed by this. They might as well have just come off the boat as immigrants, and they not knowing English, they're in the same position as those who cross the border without knowing a one word of English, and they're crossing the border because they're fleeing to the U.S. for political asylum, whereas in the Orthodox community, they should be given asylum from their own kind. In other words, they should be given some sort of asylum from this type of restriction in the community that prevents boys and girls from learning English, how to read and write and spell, and how to learn history and learn basics to get through life. They can't even read street signs, traffic signs.
Well, Amy, I'm totally sure that people that is listening to you right now are convinced that I was not exaggerating at all when I told that you are a very brave woman and a woman of integrity. This is very clear. You are talking about many, many delicate and dangerous issues. For example, you are telling about a control of the media by the Jews. You are telling about a control of the DA, of the district attorney by the Jewish communities. And I think you have mentioned before, and I want to come back to this again, that we are facing not only corruption, and this is a very huge corruption, not only sex abuse as we can find in other communities, children that are abused, that are raped, that are violated, but also you had been talking about sex traffic. Are you really
Correct.
sure that these communities are harboring, are hiding sex traffic and sex traffic related to children?
Yes, I am, and this is what is going on. It is so well known in the Orthodox community that children of divorce are used for the sex trafficking because it's a hierarchy of victimizations, and if you are divorced, then you don't have clout, and sex traffickers will prey upon the dying flesh of humanity. Basically, weak family structures. That's where the dying flesh is. So the drug traffickers and the sex traffickers, the avenues of crime, will go into third world countries when there are problems, and they prey upon the victims and they prey upon the denizens of the third world countries, victimizing them. When there is a divorce, the children become victimized, and they go into foster care. That's where they go. They can't go to a mother. They can't go to a father. They have to be taken from the parents and go into foster care on the grounds that the foster care is going to be used to rehabilitate the relationship between the child and the sexually abusive parent. So in one case, for example, it was the mother's boyfriend that was sexually abusing the child, and there was a very kind father, and the child ends up in foster care to rehabilitate the relationship with the mother and the boyfriend. So why is the child in foster care? Well, the attorney that put the child into foster care has told parents over the years, so what if your child goes into foster care? Your child's already been sexually abused. What does that mean? It means that the foster care agencies are looking for sexually submissive children because they know they're broken in. Now, in foster care, the children start to show signs of trafficking. They start to act in a very pornographic way, the way they pose, the way they look, the things they say. The children are missing. They're gone for many, many hours. Their school doesn't know where they are. The foster mother doesn't know where they are. Those children start talking about modeling. And some children, like my daughter, they come out with the pornography. My daughter did it at the edge of death in the hospital with atrophied organs, with complete dehydration and malnutrition, where her ribs were showing, her stomach was distended, and the doctor said to the newspaper that my daughter looked like a starving Biafran child. In that condition, with IV tubing and a shunt to her heart, she said that she spoke about the pornography. She threatened her father that she was going to reveal that she had to get very thin to pose in pictures, and a nurse overheard it, and the nurse made her call to the police and called social services, and the rabbis interfered with it, and not only they interfered with it, but they boasted about it at a Passover Seder a year later. And the person at the Passover Seder was a young volunteer from the National Organization for Women. And she's eating the matzah at the Seder, and she's minding her own business. And she mentioned that she was doing volunteer work at the Now organization, and she was very interested in my daughter's case, and she mentioned my name. And all of a sudden, the host and hostess started to break into peals of laughter, and the host took his elbow and he rubbed it against his wife, and he said, "My wife works in the Brooklyn DA's office, and she put the kibosh on that case when the hospital made the report. They made a report for child sex trafficking, for child endangerment. There were a number of counts, and the husband was boasting that his wife had the clout with the DA to completely suppress the case." So there's so much evidence that's coming forward about sex trafficking. And it's also known in the community that sex trafficking brings cash flow very quickly. It's pornography, and it's bringing a child together with pedophiles, and they have to find children, so they go to the agencies to find it. And happened to my daughter. My daughter came back from one of these incidents so traumatized that her foster mother called the foster agency and said, "The child is screaming that there are, quote, little men with hats all over the room." Now, who were these little men with hats? These were Hasidic Jews that were raping my daughter, abusing my daughter, molesting my daughter en masse as a group, because that's where the money is. And it is known in the community, and there are sources, colleagues of mine, and persons who were in the investigative capacity, who have looked into this, and they have found that the money from the foster care agency and from other entities in the community is been funneled for 40 years over to the West Bank to build up the settlements. And every time the feds want to investigate this, the politicians that are known as hawks, that are known as far-right zealots, they're the ones who put pressure on the victim witnesses in the Orthodox community, threatening them, pressuring them into not cooperating with the federal authorities. So why is it that the far-right settler extremists in Brooklyn, why would they have an interest in preventing the feds from talking to the victim witnesses and opening this up? Because they don't want it to come out that money from Jewish children's bodies is used to build up the settlements and in the West Bank and to arm it. Because if it comes out that the Holy Land was built off the bodies of Jewish children, it's going to be embarrassing. Now, unfortunately, this Brooklyn Mafia sex trafficking operation has not been contained. It has spread to the rest of the country, to the non-Jewish world. And this is how it happened. An expert witness by the name of a psychiatrist, Orthodox Jewish, Dr. Arthur Green, he figured out the way you sex traffic the children is you take the children from divorce and you say that the mothers are delusional about sex abuse. You discredit the mothers, and you have the mothers charged with neglect based on brainwashing their children. And that's how you get the children into foster care, through this neglect charge. So he figured out the modus operandi. He then went throughout the country as an expert witness testifying to the point where a psychiatric journal, a peer-reviewed psychiatric journal, had a letter with 19 co-signatories saying that Dr. Arthur Green is a true detriment to children all over America who have been sexually abused because of his flawed methodology. So he taught America how to discredit the mothers, and he taught America how to bring a spurious neglect proceeding against a mother in order to kidnap the child from her, seize the child from her, and put the child into foster care where the child is abused. And I have many cases in my database, and so do colleagues of mine, showing in case after case after case of children who are living in foster care because the mothers ran to the hospital to report abuse committed by the other parent, the father, and the child goes into foster care. And in foster care, in the foster home, all kinds of abuse incidents happen, and then the foster agency delivers the child to the sexually abusive father, and the fathers put these nanny cam cameras in the child's bedroom, so when the child undresses for the night, the nudity is then streamed through a paywall throughout the country to a child porn operation. And this all started in Brooklyn in the Orthodox Jewish community. They started the modus operandi with Arthur Green. They started with there was a whole article it was a cover story of New York Magazine called Fathers on Trial. And it named the agencies in Brooklyn. These are Orthodox agencies. These agencies have Orthodox board members, either they're Orthodox or they have Orthodox lawyers and Orthodox board members, Orthodox chairman of the board running the operation. And in cases where there were venereal disease, the mothers were nevertheless charged with neglect based on brainwashing their children to have a venereal disease, which makes no sense. And the children went into foster care and straight to the sexually abusive father. And this modus operandi it went like wildfire all over the country that this is happening. So what happened in Brooklyn has spread to the non-Jewish world throughout the country, unfortunately.
And now, Amy, well, you have told things that are really, really frightening. That, for example, these children sex traffic is used to fund the Israeli settlements in West Bank. This is really frightening. First time I knew about this, I must confess this, and well. We are talking about very religious people. We are not talking about a secular and atheist Jew, a person who has not any kind of belief. We are talking about persons that are very religious, very deeply religious. Where is the fear of God in persons that
Correct.
abuse children, that rape children, of the sex traffic children for wealth or for political reasons, because they think, well, it's not as important as you can think to sex traffic children, because this man is going to support the Israel state. Well, where is the fear of God in these people?
That's correct. Well, I go back to Rabbi Soloveitchik. This is Mosha Salivic, his name, the son of Rabbi Aaron Soloveitchik, who was known as an extraordinary scholar, and his son Moshe likewise is a scholar. So Mosha Salivic is a kind soul, and he spoke from the heart, and it's available online, YouTube videos of this, and he explained that the evildoers that are suppressing the child sex abuse, they're co-enabling by not allowing this to come out, and they're being very, and they're not censuring or chastising the abuser. On the contrary, they welcome them into the community because they have a lot of money and a lot of power. So Aaron Soloveitchik summarized it. Aaron's son, Moshe Salivic, summarized it this way. He said, you have a few perpetrators, but then you have scores and scores and scores of people who were co-enabling the perpetrators by not pushing them out of the synagogues, by not outing them for this, by not scolding them, by not confronting them. So they're co-enabling that. They're countenancing it. And then you have the victim population. And he said that those who are co-enabling he said the perpetrators are certainly acting against God, no question about it. He said those who are co-enabling them because they're afraid that if they say anything, that they themselves may be hurt, not physically per se, but emotionally, that their children won't get good marriage mates, that they'll be known as tattletales, they'll be known as informers, they'll be known as someone who's bad-mouthing other Jews, that they will lose clout. He said those people who put their needs of wanting to have prosperity and have good marriages for their children. When I say good marriages, I mean wealthy political homes, politically powerful homes. That's what a good marriage is. Unfortunately, when you look at it in a very surface-like way, it's not a marriage based on love and kindness. It's a marriage based on politics so that you could have strength to scare everyone else off. You want to be strong so no one starts up with you. It's like walking around with a physical shield, but it's invisible. So you want to show you're strong. So Mosha Salivic said that those that are putting their own needs to have prosperity and good marriages for their children are defying God in the worst way, because what they're doing is they're venerating and elevating the offender and making the offender into their God, because they're not afraid of God. They're afraid the offender's going to help them. So they're replacing God with a scoundrel. Basically, a rapscallion, a scoundrel, a malevolent person, an iniquitous, evil human being. They're afraid of that person, so they won't stop that person in his tracks, and they'll let the victim suffer and just be in pain, because in so doing, then the co-enablers in the community are making a deity, they're making a god out of these bad people. So then if they're making a man into God, then they're not it's no longer a monotheistic religion. They don't have a religion at all, because God said, I am your only God. I'm a jealous God, and I don't want to have any competitors. But if you're going to make your community, your neighbor, your God, because you're more afraid of what your neighbor is going to do than you're afraid of God, because you should be accountable to God and no one else, and root out evil, because God is your master and the God is who directs you. But if you're more afraid of man, an evil man, than you are of God, then you're not religious at all and you have no faith. So that's why I call it moral schisms, because to show how a person can go to the synagogue service and eat kosher food and really feel they are in earnest. In truth, you have a lot of people that are in that neutral sphere. They're not perpetrators and they're not advocates for victims, and they're co-enabling the system, but they're not inherently mean people. They're not corrupt people. It's really like the 80% of the Jewish population. It's that in that tremendously neutral area, that basket of neutrality, so to speak. And what they're doing is they're venerating man, an evil man, and making them into their God. So it's a moral schism. There's a break in the morality there that is so deep it goes all the way down to the bottom of the universe. And I think what's happening in the Middle East now with Israel is surrounded by enemies. They don't have it good. Trust me, they don't. They have been having problems for years, but it came to a head now. Now it came to a head, and they're feeling alone, and they're cognizant of the world coming at them, and all the anger being directed at them. They're cognizant that they have adversaries, and more aware now than ever before.
Amy, I think because we had been talking during almost an hour, I think we're going to have a second part next week of this interview, because I have a lot of things that I want to ask you, and I think that you have a lot of things to answer, so that I think we're going to finish right now our interview. But I want to make you a last question. During this time I had been listening to you, I had been remembering several periods, several episodes of the Jewish history. These moments before the destruction of the first temple, before the destruction of the second temple, when the immorality was very important overall in the Jewish elites, and there were very isolated people telling, we must change, you must repent, you must come back to God, because this is going to end up in a punishment, in a judgment of God. And of course, these persons, and they were Elijah, they were Amos, they were Jeremiah, etc., were rejected by a good part of the community, and they were totally rejected by the religious political elite that was governing in Judah and Israel, in the kingdom of Judah and in the kingdom of Israel. Do you feel sometimes that your situation is parallel to these persons, that you are talking in the wilderness, that you are telling you must change, and you are colliding with a stone wall that doesn't want to listen?
Well, it's interesting you to say this because there are some parallels when the Beis Hamikdash, which is the Holy Temple, was destroyed both times. It was because of a concept known as sinas chinam, which means hatred without reason, the cruelty of one Jew toward another without any reason. There was also terrible corruption. Jews are not allowed to pay for honors in the Holy Temple. And instead, there was a lot of graft. There was a lot of bribery. They were bribing and they were doing things. Everything was underhanded. There was terrible corruption and hatred without reason. These were very dark times. We are going through something very, very similar. In the post-Holocaust era in which we are living, we are going through dark times that are equivalent to the lead up to the destruction of the Holy Temple in both times around. We're doing that. However, maybe it's because I'm an eternal optimist, but I don't believe that today, from what I'm experiencing, and I'm certainly exposing a lot of horror, that it is as bad as it was then for this reason. I am fortified and encouraged when I see persons in the Orthodox community who are moral and who are right thinking and who are upset about this. And I just know, I just feel from this broadcast, and please, I want to give out my email address. It's amy.neustein@verizon.net. That's amy.neustein @Verizon, verizon.net. I really feel more hopeful that the situation is more hopeful now than it was in the time of the destruction of the Holy Temple, because I think we're more educated, there's more access to information, and I'm seeing good people come forward, good people from the Jewish community and from the Orthodox community that are very much aggrieved by this, and I'm holding on to the goodness that's there. So I don't feel a sense of hopelessness. I really don't. It's been many years, my personal battle with this and suffering. It's almost 40 years, but then God brought the Jews into the promised land after 40 years. So at 40 years, that was the cap. He stopped their suffering. Maybe my suffering will stop at 40 years likewise. So it'll be an equivalent situation. I'll get into the promised land. So I am hopeful. I'm hopeful, but I am seeing, of course, very similar types of moral decrepitude in the Orthodox community as one saw at the time of the destruction of the Holy Temple.
Well, I hope so. I hope so. Well, we must stop here, but we're going to receive you. We're going to welcome you next week. And I must tell you that when these interviews were done, in a radio set in the past, I used to give one of my books to the persons who had the kindness and they were so nice to come to answer the questions. I signed the book, but always I told to them, well, you are not obligated. Don't feel obligated to read the book. This is only a small present. But right now in the cyberspace, it's not possible to give books, so that I give a melody, a music, a song. And in your case, I have decided to leave you with a brief piece of klezmer music, German klezmer music. In fact, is named Berliner Moment. This is the moment of Berlin with the Noblau klezmer band. So that, Amy, don't forget it. We count on you for the next week. We are waiting to have a second interview the next week. Until then, well, thank you very much, and God bless you.
Thank you so much for having me here.
El programa La Voz es una producción de Artorias Incorporated y, al amparo del derecho a la libertad de expresión, no se hace responsable de las opiniones vertidas en el curso del mismo.